Well, hi everyone. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I see as the biggest challenge, or one of the biggest challenges to realizing an alternative future, which is based on my research that I'm currently doing into systemic risk and the transformation of democracy as part of a large UKRI-funded grant. My name is Steven Klein. I'm a senior lecturer in political theory in the Department of Political Economy at King's College London. And as part of this grant, essentially what I'm interested in is why are democratic systems or societies seemingly becoming less and less capable of responding to the challenges that seem to be increasingly dominating our public debate and our lives. And in essence, what I'm arguing in my project is that these deficits of democracy arise in large part because states now face new forms of systemic risk, which are risks that arise at the level of large-scale social systems, rather than individual level risks that were dealt with through the welfare state. And states don't have the sorts of tools or institutions that would make those risks manageable from a democratic, through democratic means or with democratic methods. So instead, what we get increasingly, so if you think about climate change or other large scale risks, rather than having systems that can respond to and buffer these risks in an inclusive and egalitarian manner, what we see is the state increasingly stepping in as a kind of emergency state of last resort. Or some of the financial markets, rather than thinking about ways that we can govern the generation of risk through financial markets in a way that would ensure that everyone benefits from those markets equally or on some kind of fair distributive basis. Instead, what we see is that kind of states are beholden to these destabilizing markets, and they step in after there's an emergency to insulate people from the systemic risk that arises in the market itself. And so as part of this project, what we're investigating is sort of how do we identify what a systemic risk is and what sort of systemic risks, what's the structure of those systemic risks? How are those different systemic risks undermining current models of democratic risk sharing or risk governance? And then this is maybe more the future oriented part. What are alternative ways that we could govern these risks that would make them, those governance tools consider questions like, how do we ensure that everyone has the capabilities to flourish? How do we ensure that the costs of these risks are distributed fairly? And how do we ensure that people can, we're never going to fully eliminate these large scale risks, but how can we ensure that the way that these risks are governed isn't going to reinforce pre-existing inequalities or pre-existing structural injustices? And so I think any useful vision of the future that we develop today needs to think seriously about how does the response to these risks fit into how we're going to transition to a more just or equitable society, and also needs to take seriously that we can't always know what's going to happen. And so we need to take seriously the fact that, especially today, politics is becoming more and more unpredictable, more and more chaotic and as a result of these risks. And so we need to think about how can we develop principles within a democracy that take seriously these questions, these issues of uncertainty. And so, for example, in the project, part of what we're very interested in is how can we develop precautionary principles that would say, sort of, when we implement a policy, how do we weigh up the different risks involved while still acknowledging that we aren't always going to have certainty about what the outcomes are, when or how those risks are going to materialize.